How are we all doing, ladies?
Good.
Good, yeah. Have we enjoyed it so far?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, any highlights so far?
The Brigadeiro.
Myra, any highlights?
I'm just can't wait to have my glass of champagne because I could not drink before I do this talk, so let's hurry up.
Okay. The boss is talking. All right. Cool. So.
Also, I didn't realize we were waiting for the talk.
No, it's just me is waiting. I just wanted to, behave in front of my team, like, don't drink before you work. So I'm waiting for the moment.
Cool.
But you guys are allowed.
We're just going to start with little intros, if you don't mind introducing yourself to our audience.
Yeah. So I'm Caterina. I am Senior Content Director at Tastemade EMEA. For anyone who isn't familiar with Tastemade, we are a media publisher in the food space primarily, but also home and design and travel. California-based company, but I oversee our content operations in Europe. Been at Tastemade for just over 5 years, so it's been a while. Had a few different roles within the content team, and now oversee everything that we do editorially and also working with brands as well, and of course working with creators or influencer, however we're calling them tonight.
Thank you.
I'm Rebecca. I'm obviously Senior Trends Editor at Stylus in Retail and Brand Comms. So Stylus, we're a trends intelligence agency. We have a cross-industry approach, so we do everything from product design and beauty and fashion right the way through to kind of demographic work. I sit with our engagement team, so that really means anything that brands do to engage with consumers, that consumers see, we track and we analyze.
Amazing. And Maira?
Hi. I'm Maira Genovese. I'm the founder and president of Emerging Power. Started the business 6 years ago, and I love to tell the story. That's, I think, they put on me on this storytelling. But I'm not going to tell my story because, otherwise we don't have the time. Emerging Power is a fully integrated marketing agency. We started as an influencer market agency 5 years ago. But of course, with the change in the industry and the shift on approach of how brands, develop their marketing strategy, today we're not just an influencer marketing agency. So we do everything from paid media to producing content, experience. And as Paula mentioned earlier, we're working on a very exciting data performance platform. It's going to be our proprietary, platform we're going to have in-house. But influencer marketing is still the core of everything we do. And that's briefly the background of Emerging Power. But again, we will talk more about what we do today.
Thank you. Please give them a round of applause, please. So, please, as I said, feel free to lead a conversation and chip in where you can. I'm going to open the panel up with a question. One that I think is sort of very important to hear from each perspective from you all three, which is why do you think that influencer-led storytelling has such a powerful effect on consumers today?
I can start with this one. I think when I think about storytelling, it's all about telling stories.
Yeah.
And influencers tell the stories, and they're the people at the heart of it, and they're the people that can, tell the stories in a way that we couldn't tell without them.
Yeah.
We talked about it in the previous panels as well. Someone mentioned how traditional media has actors, so it doesn't feel very authentic. At Tastemade, we are a video-first company, and what we do is content that is our bread and butter. And we have some unhosted content that's just hands making food, top-down video. But when we started introducing influencers and content creators to it, we kind of unlocked something that allowed our audience to really connect with the content on a much deeper level. So I think influencers are just at the heart of content that is really authentic, and that creates trust with your audience in a way that you wouldn't be able to do without them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess influencers at their best kind of cut through the choice paralysis of the internet and the kind of the vastness of it. That almost acts like a kind of human filter for the vastness of the internet. And I think for me, when influencers are particularly exciting, it's combining that inspiration and that discovery technology with other types of technology as well. So say, we can talk about it in more detail later, but say kind of fulfillment technology. Mm-hmm. So you're really kind of closing down that funnel and you're kind of servicing a consumer kind of all in one, a kind of one-click solution from discovery and inspiration to getting something in their basket or even getting it delivered the same day.
Yeah, like for me, like storytelling is like, as for Imaging Power, storytelling is always been on our DNA, right? So it's how we started. But of course, we have now to add data into the stories that we're telling, because as we discussed it earlier in the panel with the Bumble, Paul, and the rest of the team, data becomes such an important element. But I think it's very important to say that data, yes, became a very important element for influencer marketing, but storytelling still is the key for you to engage with your brands. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? And how do we engage with content is through emotion, and I think we talk a lot about that, right? So through the story of the content that influencers are creating, how do you pass in that emotion through the content, and how your audience, the audience of the creators, are engaging with that content in an emotional way that is going to be relatable. So I think storytelling, it's how is the starting point of every strategy, and of course combining now with the data. But without having the story to engage and emotionally connect with your audience, how are you gonna build your community? How are you gonna creating the excitement and be relatable? And of course the authenticity play a huge part of that, right? Because you have to tell a story, but how authentic you are when you're telling your story is also key.
Yeah, and you mentioned authenticity. In terms of like the consumer base, besides authenticity, what do you think they're looking for in storytelling in order to behave on an ad or make a purchase? Like, is there more to it than just authenticity?
For me, a big part of it is curation. And I think that sometimes thinking about curating has a bit of a negative connotation. But I think that's the power of influencers, is the fact that they curate who they choose to work with. And I'm really glad that Yvonne was here to talk about that exactly. Because she spoke to how she's picky about the brands that she chooses to work with. And that's really important. So as a brand, you want to be also picky about the influencers that you're working with, because the audience of that influencer will be influenced by them. And so that idea of having someone who can tell your story and be that person who curates the content and the storytelling to their own audience then adds that level of trust. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. And I find myself, I don't want to say falling for it because that has a lot of, again, negative connotation, but if I'm planning a trip, I'm looking at some of my favorite influencers, seeing what hotels they're staying at, what restaurants they're going to. Right now, my Instagram is exclusively gift guides, and I'm literally buying every other thing that I see on there. It's probably very bad the last couple of weeks. But it's all about curating and kind of building that trust with your audience, and then ensuring that they can then act on it. And that's what's really useful for the brand at the end of the day.
Yeah, and Rebecca, have you got any?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really interesting, because I think you're right. At the moment, it's all about curation, but I think that's actually it's set to change. I mean, when you think about the internet as it is now, and kind of we're talking about social storytelling. The internet as it is now has obviously been built on these social media networks. That's what Web 2 is. When you look ahead to kind of Web 3, and I was talking to a colleague about this the other day, when you look ahead to Web 3 and how different our interactions are going to be in that space, it's actually really interesting for brands, because you're not going to be, posing for a picture or kind of taking a picture, thinking about the angle, I'll post it on Instagram, I'll think about the caption, okay, I'm done, or whatever. Or even TikTok, which as another panelist said, is a lot more raw, but you're still thinking about it. There's still a kind of a script there. When you're looking at Web3, actually, we're going to be going into these spaces that mirror a lot more our conversations in real life. So you're going to be entering some space, some kind of virtual room as your avatar. You're going to be chatting to people. And I think that's really interesting for brands, because how do you have those kind of conversations? How do you shape your narrative or your image in that space if it's no longer maybe about curation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point that you mentioned Web3, because Maira loves...
I don't. I don't know who did that, actually.
But yeah, and I guess now we've sort of mentioned it, do you have any thoughts in terms of like the storytelling aspect, in terms of, shaping consumer behavior? And in Web3? Like, will brands be embracing storytelling the same way that they do now on some of these platforms that we see?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're so... When people talk about Web3, you're like, oh God, okay, that's again, yeah.
I like Web3, by the way.
You do,
Apart
or
from
you?
me, I'm not,
You're a Web3 fan, but we're journeying towards that so slowly. You know, it's like talking about and trying to imagine what Twitter would be in the 90s or the internet in the 70s. We're journeying towards it really slowly. But I think in the spaces that we're seeing at the moment, the kind of what we at Stylus talk about as kind of proto-metaverse spaces, so they're kind of like in between your kind of standard video game and what might happen in 20, 30 years' time. We're seeing these spaces spring up, so everyone, you know, knows kind of Nike Land on Roblox or something like that. So it's about building that environment. How influencers fit into that, I mean, it's a whole different story, obviously. And whether you're kind of going down the co-creation route with kind of skins and stuff like that, that could be really interesting. But yeah, as I say, it's really quite far.
I love that you mentioned about the gaming and the Roblox, because like when I think about Web3, I know we talk about the word metaverse, but if you think about virtual experience, it's happening for a while, right? So it's not new, because like we see like the, you know, Fortnite, Roblox, how long they've been around, right? So what's happened is metaverse is bringing that experience to the mass, where before we just have the gamers there working on that virtual experience, right? So in essence, is the metaverse with the glass, but the actually experience, the virtual experience is being happening within the, you know, the gaming space. And if you look at brands like Nespresso, I don't want to mention Balenciaga because it's, you know, it's very, but I'm mentioning it.
Don't mention
so they have been doing like virtual experience within the gaming space for like 2 or 3 years, right? So like Gucci is another brand that they have their own store within Roblox, so they're creating that whole experience. So it's just like, how can we learn that, like, from actually the gamer or like from these influencers that create that space to actually help us to transition into the mass of metaverse, right? Because in essence, we're just providing that experience to all of you, and not just being onto the, you know, unique space of the gamers, but the storytelling will play a huge, you know, part of creating those space. Because if you wanted to create an experience, what's the story that you wanted to tell through that experience?
So you think that would kind of continue, that kind of structure or that kind of thinking would continue, you know, as we all kind of venture into the metaverse and Web3 slowly?
My humble opinion is yes. I think like without having any storytelling within the universe of metaverse, how are we going to engage, you know, consumers or engage us into, you know, participation in this experience? And I think with the metaverse, like as you said, like, oh, it's being very slow. It's because there is a lot of like brands. They think a lot. They think too much before jumping and test and learn, because it's all about going there and test and learn. And I talk a lot about test and learn within our business, because I'm a big fan of like, if you don't know how to do it, how it's gonna resonate and how people are gonna relate, just do it. And then learn and learn from it. And I think the metaverse is all about that. And it's not going to be for everyone. So it's not everyone that's going to be excited about this word. And that is okay. That's okay, because we're going to have people that will prefer to join experience like ours here, face-to-face. You know, there will be people that will prefer to still with the social media, Instagram and TikTok. But there will be, you know, people that will, so I think it's not about one on another. We will have people to be engaging across all.
Yeah, and sort of kind of bringing it back to the real world, reality. In terms of, I guess, storytelling as a whole, in terms of in the agency and as you built it, how much has it kind of impacted, you know, the way your team and yourself, you know, have created strategies for the brands that you've worked with?
Like, as I said, like storytelling is in our DNA. And then for everything we do, we empower our team, we empower you guys, and we empower brands to, you know, to tell their story in a meaningful way, right? Because tell a story just to tell a story, that's no point. So what is the story that you wanted to tell? What is the purpose behind that story? And I think for us as an agency, Imaging Power has always started with my story, right? So And I'm a big fan of story because like if we, like even when we're doing interviews, the first thing we do is just tell the story of Emerging Power to engage the employers to join the business.
Yeah.
And this is how people feel attracted about working with us because we have a story, a very incredible story to tell. So I think it's just the matter of having a meaning story behind the content and strategy you're putting together.
And Caterina, for just a question for you. You have a huge community. 7.1 million. Can we give a round of applause for that? 7.1 million. I'm a big foodie. So that's quite impressive. Yeah. So in terms of like kind of how you developed your strategy, is there one sort of like gem you can share with us in terms of like maybe the storytelling aspect of how you sort of built your community to that size?
Yeah, I don't want to sound too repetitive because I do think it was covered in the previous panel as well, but I think Melissa, the brand Melissa was touched on it as well, but the main key point is be everywhere. And I don't mean be everything for everyone because we know that doesn't work and you need to, be clear about who your audience is and speak to them really directly, but be on every platform. And Maira, what you said about testing, that's all we're doing all the time. New products, new features, new social platforms, we're on them. The last few months we've been testing e-commerce live streaming, which is, not nearly Web3, but still a very scary, strange space. It's been very odd, and it's very new here in Europe. It's obviously not as new in China, but testing and being on every single platform and understanding how to be different on every platform. We used to say a few years ago, back when we started, that we would shoot content once and edit for every platform. I don't think that's the case anymore because that's no longer applicable. We now have to shoot specifically for each platform. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. Be everywhere as much as you possibly can. Okay.
And in terms of, I guess, like this is a question for everyone, in terms of like the storytelling element, how pivotal would you say it is for, getting that conversion? If we kind of whistle it down to sort of just strategies and the KPI for brands or creators themselves, but kind of turning that storytelling into conversion. Like, is that process still authentic, or are we sort of kind of bending towards trying to get the conversions as well?
Like what I say, the conversion element, because like there's this mystification of the links on the stories. That's the only way of leading to conversion. But that's not the reality, right? Especially because we're changing the way we create content. So we as a consumer, as a human being, we are much more savvy. We know when it's an advertising. We know when it's authentic. So the link in stories is not how we should think of a conversion model. The way I see is just like how you can embed your product, your service within the content to tell the story. So is the product will be there into the story you're creating as a secondary that's going to lead people to engage with the content to buy the product. So we're not just like click here, buy now, shop now. I think it's just like how you can embed that product within the content creation, which again goes back to the storytelling. So that's how we see better conversion. But it's still a lot of like brands thinking that, all right, so that swipe here, click here is what's going to lead to the conversion, but it's actually not.
And most of the time, those like swipe up or click here, it's underwhelming, and brands tend to be underwhelmed by it. But that's not the point of storytelling. And obviously, conversions are important, and I think that brands will always be asking about that, and it's always something that we have to take into consideration at Tastemade. But when it comes to storytelling, and when it comes to working with influencers and creators specifically, it's all about like brand affinity and making sure that there is alignment between the creator that you're working with and the brand that you're working with. This year, I don't think we've had a single brief from a brand that didn't include some sort of influencer element to it, because everyone wants to tap into the creator economy. But sometimes it feels really forced. Sometimes they come in and they say, oh, we want to work with a creator that has this many followers, or with a creator of this caliber. A lot of the time they don't have the budget for it, but most of the time that's the wrong approach as well. And when it comes to the actual performance of the content and however we choose to measure that conversion, it's almost entirely unrelated, and so it's a lot more to do with the brand affinity and whether it feels like an authentic match between the brand, the product, and the actual influencer.
Just to add one more point here, when we see the best conversion is when we see that we are using the same influencer to talk about that product, about that brand in a long-term relationship, right? Because when you're engaging influencers, that is not just a one-off, because it is like sometimes brands think, oh, if I engage with like 10 influencers for the first time, they're gonna, convert into X amount of sales and that amount of clicks. But one-off doesn't really do the job, right? So how we engaging with that influencer in an authentic way, but also establishing and fostering that relationship to be a long-term relationship, because then their community, their followers, they will see that they're always talking about the brand, about the product, and it's when you start engaging and you see the conversions. And I think first comes, the awareness, the trust, the authenticity, and then conversion is never gonna be, the first metric they're gonna see straight away coming from an influencer content. Of course, that's all the brands looking for conversion, but we need to think on the long term.
Yeah, and would you say sort of the storytelling element when you build your content, allows for consumer discovery for like products and for brand affinity as well?
100%. I think that's what Caterina said. Like she's now doing the gift, shop, and that's what she's seeing on like the algorithms of her content. So I'm moving house. And then, everything that I'm looking and searching for products is related to the furniture that I need to purchase. And I've been very influenced by the influencers because I'm following, influencers that are moving as well. And they're showing like how they're moving, where they're buying, or the best price. So I think it's just like, it is. Yeah.
Okay, and then just one last question for you, Rebecca. With these sort of consumer behaviors in terms of the storytelling aspect and people not necessarily swiping up or clicking, shop now, like how are sort of brands like adapting to this new consumer behavior?
I mean, I think everyone always talks about kind of fashion as a first mover, but I actually think really interesting things are happening in food and grocery. I mean, obviously we've got Tastemade here, and like I said, I think fascinating things are happening. I know maybe you guys aren't such a fan of kind of combining that storytelling element and that kind of instant conversion element. I think from a kind of a brand point of view, I think that's fascinating. I think, just being able to absolutely track that. And even if it's not that instant, I mean, I saw, I think it was even this week, somebody came out, I think it was Klarna, with a creator platform. And it's kind of harnessing that data and being able to, matchmake brands, matchmake influencers, and then having all of that wish listing data, all of that payment data behind you. I think that's fascinating from a brand perspective.
That's the affiliate program, right? Which is play a huge role when it comes to the conversion, because it's when we actually working with the creators to be the advocates for your brand, but also monetizing that, right? So I think that's when you go to much more a deep, relationship with the creators. I think as Melissa, like when you're like talking about Melissa, how you engage in the different channels and affiliating one of the models that you use, right? And I think it's like when you think about conversion, that's affiliate program it's what we're seeing the most of the data when it comes to getting the conversion.
Amazing. We're almost done with time. I have a question for the audience. Then I'll open up for one or two questions for our panelists. So obviously with Christmas coming up, just a show of hands of people who will be looking to influencers to give them gift ideas, or is anyone doing that at the moment? And you don't have to be embarrassed. You tell the truth. Okay, cool. So you guys you got your own inspiration here because no one's hands up. Okay, cool. And are there any questions before we wrap up for our panelists? Yes, one there. There you go.
Hi, My question is, how can you see in storytelling, how can you create this storytelling inside platforms like Be Real or Discord in your perspective? How can we build this story inside these two platforms?
Yeah, it's a very hard question. I know I was like, oh, be on every platform. I'm now like, oh, be real. Yeah, I'm one of those people who feels really old about Be Real right now. So I don't know, but I will tell you that I literally have a meeting about the next week in my calendar, titled something like Be Real, how can we be on it? So I don't have an answer for you, but the answer is we will find a way, so stay tuned and check us out.
We'll have that extensive footage.
Especially because TikTok now launched their own Be Real, right? So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
something there, but I'm with you. We're still trying to figure it out.
Okay, great. We'll get you the answer. Don't worry. We'll get you the answer. Anyone else with a question, Andrea? No. Okay. You had one last time. I don't want to forget you this time. Are you sure? Okay. Anyone? Oh, here we go. Dan, all the way up there. Are you gonna meet in the middle? Okay, cool.
I have a question for Caterina. Tastemade, obviously, it's sort of it's a platform, it's a community, it's sort of that indefinable entity that's been created.
We kind of call ourselves a super creator sometimes.
A what, sorry?
We call ourselves a super creator sometimes.
A super creator. I mean, that almost answers my question.
Please refer to us as that.
My question was, do you work with influencers, you're a platform, you are a community, but do you ever sort of use influencers as role models for the way that you engage your audience?
Yeah, 100%. I think kind of similar to what Yvonne was saying earlier about her split being 70% she's influenced, 30% she influences. I feel a very similar way about what we do at Tastemade. We work with influencers across the board in everything that we do. So for editorial content, to create our own content and our own storytelling, in branded content to tell the brand's stories. So 100%. And a lot of the work that we do happens in our studio and in our physical space, which always creates an opportunity for us to engage very directly with them. So we have our production team, we have my team, the content team, always on set and always engaging with these influencers in person. And then also via social, engaging with them on the platforms. So 100%, it's kind of a constant, communicating and exchanging learnings, yeah.
Amazing. Oh, one more. Do we have time for one more? Yeah. Okay, lucky you. There you go.
Sorry, just really quickly, kind of on that breath, if your influencers are being influenced by the consumers, by the customers, and if you're engaging with the influencers, it sounds like the customers, the base of people is what's most important. What kind of work are you doing to understand them, their needs, their attitudes, behaviors, how those are changing? Is that something that's important?
Totally, and that's kind of at the core of what we do. This goes back to the very first panel about data and data guiding everything that we do, and a lot of the data being gathered from listening to our audience. That's like 50% of what my team does. It sounds like a content team, all we do is create. I am really into analytics, and I force my entire team to be as well. And we spend half our time, I know that sounds like I'm a terrible
Glad that is not just me. That's why I
okay,
just look at
good.
it.
Myra
It's not
keeps saying
just me.
data.
I'm just keeping
No.
the mantra.
Yeah, you have to, and I think that that's the only way to do content right.
I recognize that.
I swear she didn't make me say it, yeah. But that is truly the only way to get content right and to be able to evolve a strategy. So every single week we're looking at reporting, we're looking at data, and then that informs our decision. And it's all about audience listening, because without it there would be no content and we would be stuck, we wouldn't know how to move forward.
Amazing. I feel like you've given me a bit of work to do tomorrow, and the strategy team.
All about the numbers.
Thank you so much, because I'm just like data. It's just like, because as we do so much campaigns with CMG Power, so it's key for us to understand. Okay, we've done that. Like for example, Bumble, like we did that Black Love campaign, and all right. So if you have to, what's the learning? What's the data? What's the analytics here to actually support the strategy team to build the next strategy, but taking the learning, but be very data-driven about the concept and the storytelling we're going to tell. So you cannot do a new strategy for your brand without taking the learnings and the data from your previous campaign, right?
Amazing. I'm going to end it here before something else gets added on. No, it's been an amazing sort of 3 sessions. Thank you everyone for sort of staying the full course. Hope you've enjoyed all the conversations. We are wrapping up now. If you haven't had a chance to have a go on the VR, please do so before we leave. But this is a wrap for the Power Up session, 5th episode. So please give a round of applause for our guests. And thank you.